You asked Allah to change your life, and now you're wondering why everything around you is collapsing. Let me tell you something. Sometimes when you're holding on to the wrong things, Allah has to let them fall so your hands are finally free to receive what's meant for you. The pain wasn't to break you, it was to interrupt the version of you that wasn't meant to survive this next chapter. You didn't even notice it happening at first. You were changing quietly, not into the person Allah created you to be, but into someone shaped by fear, by wounds, by people who only loved you when you stayed small. You became quieter, not out of peace, but because you were afraid your voice would push them away. You stayed, not because your heart was full, but because you were scared no one else would understand your emptiness. You kept giving chances, not because they deserved them, but because you didn't want to be alone again. And slowly, without realizing it, you started losing yourself to protect what was never written for you to keep. You kept praying for peace, but every day your chest felt tighter. You kept asking Allah for ease, but you were clinging to people and paths that were never safe for your soul. You asked for love, but you were confusing attachment with purpose and survival with destiny. So Allah, in His mercy, let it hurt, not to break you, not to punish you, but to interrupt you, to stop the version of you that was being built by pain instead of purity, to stop the version of you that would have collapsed in the next season because it wasn't built on truth. He let the heartbreak hit. He let the door shut. He let the silence grow heavy because He knew if He didn't allow it to hurt that deeply, you would have kept walking straight into something that looked like love, but was quietly killing your soul. You would have settled into a life that seemed okay, but would have made you forget why you were even created. You would have kept chasing a future that felt familiar, but was never meant for the real you Allah was preparing. So the pain came, hard, uninvited, all at once. And you thought it meant Allah had turned away. But no, it was the opposite. He was turning you back toward yourself, back toward Him, back toward the path where your soul could breathe again. Because the truth is, the version of you that needed to die was the one that forgot your worth, the one that kept trying to fix others while you fell apart silently. The one that kept giving your energy to people who only showed up when they needed something. The one that thought being loved meant being less. Allah saw that version and He said, no more. Because the next chapter He's written for you requires strength you haven't tapped into yet. Requires clarity you couldn't have while your heart was still crowded with pain. Requires faith that can only come after everything false has been stripped away. So yes, it hurts. It hurts to let go of who you thought you needed to be. It hurts to feel everything fall apart. It hurts to lose what you thought you couldn't survive without. But what's even more painful is staying in a version of yourself that was never meant to carry your future. This pain, this deep soul-tearing ache you feel is not your punishment. It's your rebirth. And every time it aches again, know that it's just another layer of the old you being removed. So the version Allah always intended can finally rise. You're not being broken. You're being rescued. You're not being delayed. You're being interrupted before you lost yourself forever. And sometimes that interruption is the most beautiful form of mercy Allah can give. You kept waiting, day after day. You kept praying, hoping, asking for a sign, for movement, for change. But all you got was silence. No shifts, no clarity, just stillness. And in that stillness, your heart began to panic. You wondered, did Allah forget me? Did my du'as not reach Him? Why isn't anything happening when I've tried everything I can? But what you didn't realize was that the silence wasn't a rejection. It was protection. It was a divine pause. A gentle hand pressing on your chest, keeping you from walking into something that looked right on the outside, but was slowly destroying you from within. There was something or someone in your life that you were holding on to with everything you had, but it wasn't clean. It wasn't safe. It wasn't written to walk with you into the next phase of your life. It was comfort, but it was toxic comfort. It felt familiar, but it was quietly draining your spirit in ways you didn't even see. You were surviving, not thriving. You were attached, not aligned. You were slowly being poisoned by a situation, a habit, a relationship, a mindset that looked harmless, but deep down was pulling you further and further away from your fitrah. And so Allah kept you still. He stalled your steps. He let the doors stay closed. He let the answers stay hidden. He kept the progress frozen. Because if He had moved things forward while you were still carrying that burden, you would have taken it with you into the next stage. And it would have corrupted everything. He loved you too much to let that happen. So He made the silence louder until it forced you to stop, to reflect, to finally ask yourself, what am I still holding on to that Allah already told my heart to release? It wasn't a delay. It was a detox, a spiritual pause, so the poison could leave your system before it spread into your future. And yes, letting go felt unbearable, because sometimes the thing that poisons you is also the thing you once begged Allah to keep. But Allah knows. He knows what's ahead. He knows what you're not ready to see yet. He knows that some things, no matter how beautiful they seemed, were only meant to be temporary. So that silence wasn't empty. It was full of mercy. A mercy that said, I won't let you walk into what you're praying for with a heart that's still infected by what I removed. Sometimes we think the silence means nothing is happening. But behind the scenes, Allah is clearing the path, cleaning your soul, rebuilding your foundation, and removing whatever would have poisoned your peace after it arrived. So next time you feel stuck, next time you feel like nothing is moving, don't ask, why is Allah delaying me? Ask, what am I still holding on to that Allah is trying to remove with love? Because the moment you let go, the silence will break, the path will clear, and the poison will no longer have access to the new life Allah is preparing for you. You cried for a sign, so Allah let the pain speak louder than any sign you would have listened to. You were desperate, desperate for guidance, desperate for a sign, desperate for something, anything that could tell your heart what to do next. You raised your hands and begged Allah, Ya Allah, just give me a sign, make it clear, make it easy, make it obvious. You cried, maybe even screamed inside your soul, because you didn't want to make the wrong choice. You didn't want to walk away from something you were emotionally invested in. You didn't want to give up on a person you had wrapped your future around. You didn't want to accept that what you wanted might not be what was written. So you cried for a sign, but here's the truth. Most people won't say, Allah did send you signs, subtle ones, quiet ones, moments your heart felt uneasy, conversations that didn't sit right, doors that didn't open no matter how hard you knocked, people whose words sounded sweet, but whose actions kept cutting you quietly. A version of love that felt more like walking on glass than walking toward peace. But you kept saying, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe it's just a test. Maybe I'm supposed to stay. So Allah, in His infinite mercy, sent you a sign you couldn't ignore. A sign so loud, so raw, so soul-shaking, that it would pierce through the noise of your justifications. He sent you pain, because pain is the one sign we all understand. Pain doesn't lie. Pain doesn't wait. Pain doesn't ask for permission. It just hits straight through the heart. And when Allah sends pain as a sign, it's not because He's cruel. It's because He knows how gentle you are, how much you love, how long you'll keep holding on, even when you're bleeding. So He sends the pain not to punish you, but to protect you from staying in something that looks fine on the outside, but is crushing your soul on the inside. The pain was the answer to your dua. You just didn't expect it to look like heartbreak. You thought a sign would be peaceful. But sometimes the most merciful signs are the ones that hurt the most, because they save you from things you didn't even realize were drowning you. You see, Allah knew that if He whispered it gently, you wouldn't listen. You would have stayed. You would have convinced yourself to try harder, to be more patient, to wait just a little longer. So He made it unbearable. He made the pain heavy, so heavy that you finally let go, because nothing else could have made you walk away. And yes, it broke you, but it also woke you. It brought you back to your knees. It made you return to the one who never left. And it showed you that your heart doesn't belong in the hands of creation. It belongs with the Creator. So the next time you find yourself saying, Ya Allah, show me a sign, know that sometimes the sign will be peace, but sometimes the sign will be pain. Not to hurt you, but to answer you, to free you, to realign you with the life that was always written, just waiting for you to release what you were never meant to keep. Because sometimes the loudest sign is the one that breaks you just enough to rebuild you. What you called loyalty to them was actually a form of self-abandonment Allah couldn't let continue. You thought you were being loyal. You told yourself, I'm just being patient. I'm being understanding. I'm standing by them like I'm supposed to. You wore your silence like a badge of honor, letting them speak over your truth, letting them rewrite your worth with their moods, letting them leave and return and leave again. And each time you welcome them like they never left, because you called it loyalty. But deep down, if you were honest with yourself, you weren't protecting them. You were abandoning yourself. You were loyal to people who weren't loyal to your peace, to moments that didn't protect your heart, to connections that made you question your value more than they reminded you of your purpose. And slowly you stopped showing up for yourself because you were too busy showing up for people who only clapped when you were useful but disappeared when you were in need. You silenced your boundaries. You hid your hurt. You tolerated the small cuts because they didn't mean it. Because maybe I'm too sensitive. Because this is just how relationships are. No, this wasn't love. This wasn't loyalty. This was slow spiritual erosion. It was self-abandonment disguised as goodness. And Allah saw it. He saw how you kept giving chances, not because they changed, but because you didn't want to be alone. Because somewhere deep inside, you believed you had to earn love by sacrificing yourself. So He stepped in, not to hurt you, but to save you. Because you were loving them so loudly, you couldn't hear how much your own soul was crying in the background. Allah allowed it to fall apart, not because you were wrong to care, but because caring shouldn't cost you your self-respect. He watched you lower your standards again and again, telling yourself it was noble, telling yourself you were just being there. But loyalty that constantly betrays your inner peace isn't loyalty. It's slow self-destruction. And Allah couldn't let it continue. You were praying for love that healed, but what you were holding on to was love that hollowed you out. You were praying for a connection that lifted you, but what you were accepting was one that dimmed your light and called it humility. Allah knew if He let you keep calling it loyalty, you'd keep losing yourself in the name of being the bigger person. You'd keep staying where your soul was shrinking just to protect the illusion of closeness. So He sent the pain. He pulled you back. He exposed the patterns. He made it so clear that you couldn't deny it anymore. Because real love doesn't erase you. Real loyalty doesn't come at the cost of your emotional well-being. Real connection doesn't require you to abandon your own fitrah just to stay relevant in someone else's story. You see, Allah was never trying to take away your heart. He was trying to give it back to you, to remind you that your loyalty is precious, that it should be given to those who protect it, not those who break it and expect you to clean the pieces in silence. So maybe this heartbreak isn't the end. Maybe it's the moment you finally come back home to yourself, to your boundaries, to the version of you that Allah loves. Even when others only loved the parts they could benefit from, Allah saw the self-abandonment you called love. And He said, enough! Because you deserve to be loyal to someone who remembers your soul too. And that starts with being loyal to the one soul you were never meant to abandon, your own. The collapse didn't come because you were weak. It came because you were finally strong enough to face the truth. You've been calling yourself weak because you finally broke down, because you cried when no one was watching, because you couldn't pretend anymore, because you didn't have the energy to carry it all like you always do. But let me tell you something no one else did. You didn't collapse because you were weak. You collapsed because for the first time, you were finally strong enough to stop hiding from the truth. You see, when you were fragile, Allah protected you from the truth. He covered your eyes from things you weren't ready to see. He softened the blow. He delayed the clarity. Because had you seen it then, it would have destroyed your heart completely. But now, you were ready. Not comfortable, not excited, but ready. Ready to feel what you've been numbing. Ready to admit what you've been denying. Ready to confront what you kept pushing under the surface. Because there comes a point on the journey of healing where the only way forward is through. And going through something doesn't look neat. It doesn't look graceful. It looks like shaking hands, like panic in sujood, like crying in the shower so no one hears you, like feeling lost in the very place you once called safe. But that is not weakness. That is sacred strength. Because anyone can fake peace. Anyone can keep busy to avoid pain. But it takes true strength to finally sit with the reality you were afraid of. To say, I don't think this person ever valued me the way I valued them. I don't think this dream was meant to last. I think I've been betraying myself for far too long just to feel loved. The collapse wasn't random. It was divine. Because Allah saw your heart and He knew you were finally strong enough to receive the truth and not break beyond repair. You didn't collapse because you were giving up. You collapsed because the false self was being peeled away. The version of you built on fear, approval, and survival couldn't go any further. It had reached its limit. And so Allah allowed it to fall, not to leave you in ruins, but to show you what was never real to begin with. Because sometimes the collapse is the clearest revelation of what your soul already knew, but your heart was too soft to accept. And yes, it hurts. It hurts to realize you held on too long, that you prayed so hard for something that was never meant to stay. But that's why Allah waited. He waited until you had enough faith to feel pain without turning bitter. He waited until your heart had enough light to go through the breakdown without losing its purity. This wasn't weakness. This was your becoming. This was your truth finally catching up to your strength. And maybe what looked like the end of everything was actually the beginning of your most honest self. You're not collapsing. You're shedding. You're not falling apart. You're waking up. And Allah knew the exact moment your soul could handle the truth. And that moment is now. The version of you that was begging for relief would have settled for less than what Allah wrote for you. There was a time you were on your knees, begging not for greatness, not for a miracle, just for relief, just for something, anything, to make the pain stop, to make the silence go away, to make the weight in your chest a little easier to carry. You were exhausted. You were drowning in emotions no one knew about. You smiled for others, but your soul was collapsing in private. So you raised your hands and whispered, Ya Allah, I don't need much. Just let something go right. Just let this work. Please, just let me keep this. And that's when everything fell apart. You lost what you were begging to keep. You were delayed from what you were praying to enter. The ease didn't come. The relief didn't arrive. And you wondered why Allah would deny such a small request. But my dear soul, it wasn't because your dua was ignored. It was because the version of you that was begging for relief was still willing to settle for far less than what Allah wrote for you. That version of you, the tired you, the desperate you, the heartbroken you, was asking for comfort, not clarity. You just wanted peace, even if it meant keeping something that wasn't good for your soul long term. You would have stayed in that relationship. You would have taken that opportunity. You would have forced that door open. And in doing so, you would have missed the destiny that was actually written for your elevation. So Allah withheld it. Not because He didn't love you, but because He loved you more than you loved yourself in that moment. He saw that the person you were at that time would have accepted crumbs and called it a blessing, would have confused emotional survival with success, would have mistaken it's working for now with it's meant for me. But Allah doesn't write mediocre stories. And He doesn't answer your dua by feeding the version of you that only knows how to survive. He answers your dua by transforming you into the version of yourself who knows how to receive the blessing properly when it finally arrives. So yes, He made you wait. He made you let go. He didn't give you what you were begging for because He wasn't just protecting your future. He was protecting you from your old self, the self that would have given your heart away too quickly, the self that would have settled for half love, the self that would have confused attention with affection and comfort with purpose. Allah saw that self and He said, not yet, you're still growing. Because the blessing He wrote for you doesn't belong to the tired version of you who just wanted to feel okay. It belongs to the healed version of you. The version you're becoming now through every delay, every rejection, and every unanswered prayer. That version isn't begging. That version walks with trust. That version doesn't settle. That version doesn't just ask for relief. It asks for what is written by Allah, even if it comes with a longer wait. And when that version of you is ready, the doors will open, the peace will return. The du'as will unfold not as temporary comfort, but as permanent divine placement. So no, Allah didn't deny you. He was just too merciful to say yes to someone who hadn't yet become ready for what was always theirs. You thought you were waiting for a door to open, but Allah was rebuilding the entire house you were meant to enter. You were standing in front of that door for so long, knocking, waiting, praying. You thought it would open any day. You told yourself, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe if I try just a little harder, it'll finally open. Because to you that door made sense. It felt right. It felt like the thing you were meant to walk through. The relationship, the job, the opportunity, the answer. It had timing, it had logic, it even had emotional proof behind it. So when it didn't open, when all you heard was silence on the other side, you started to wonder, what am I doing wrong? Did Allah forget I'm still standing here? Why is everyone else moving forward while I'm still in the same place? But what you didn't realize was this. You weren't just waiting on a door. You were waiting on something much bigger. And Allah wasn't ignoring you. He was rebuilding the entire house behind that door. Because what you were asking for was only one room in a place you couldn't even imagine yet. You were asking for a key, but Allah was still pouring the foundation. You were asking for progress, but Allah was redesigning the blueprint of your future entirely. Because had He opened that door too soon, you would have entered a place that wasn't finished, a connection that wasn't ready, a life that couldn't sustain your soul, and it would have looked like a blessing until it broke you from the inside out. So Allah delayed it, and not just for days, but sometimes for months, sometimes even for years. Not because you didn't deserve it, but because the future He wrote for you wasn't built on fast results. It was built on divine perfection. You were waiting at the surface, but Allah was working underground, preparing the structure, wiring the lights, reinforcing the walls you'd never see. So when you finally walked in, it wouldn't collapse. And I know you were tired, you questioned yourself, you questioned the process. You wondered if maybe the door was never for you. But here's the truth, most people don't say, when Allah makes you wait that long, it's because what's being prepared is far more sacred than what you were praying for. You weren't just waiting on someone to love you, you were waiting on someone who could love your soul. You weren't just waiting on a job, you were waiting on a purpose that wouldn't suffocate your spirit. You weren't just waiting on the next step, you were waiting on alignment, on divine timing, on the version of you that could fully thrive once you arrived. And that takes time, that takes detours, that takes rooms being built in silence. So when you step into that house, it feels like home, not like survival. So no, you weren't forgotten, you weren't rejected, you weren't being delayed just for the sake of patience. You were being protected, upgraded, prepared for a house so beautiful. You'll cry when you finally see what Allah was building while you stood there, thinking nothing was happening. So keep waiting, but don't just wait at the door. Prepare yourself for the house, because when it's finally time, Allah won't just open the door. He'll say, come in, I built this for you, and only now are you ready to enter it. He let you feel forgotten so you could finally remember the only one who never left. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there, quietly, slowly, convincingly, making you feel like you don't matter anymore. You look around and notice they don't check in like they used to. They don't ask how your heart is. The text stopped. The conversations faded. The invitations never came. And a part of you starts wondering, did I do something wrong? Why is everyone forgetting me now that I need them most? You try to stay kind. You tried to stay present. You tried to be there for people even when no one was there for you. But somehow you ended up being the one left behind. And it's lonely. It's humiliating. It's the kind of ache you can't even explain. Because how do you describe the pain of being invisible when your heart was once the one lighting up everyone else's world? You thought the love you gave would be remembered. You thought the loyalty you offered would mean something. You thought the time, the energy, the sacrifices would come back to you when you needed them. But they didn't. And you felt forgotten. But listen closely now, because this may be the moment your soul was born for. Allah let you feel forgotten so you could finally remember the only one who never left. You see, people leaving wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch in your story. It was the turning point, because somewhere in your journey, you had given pieces of your heart to too many people. You tied your joy to how others saw you. You made your worth dependent on how often they remembered you. You looked for love in their responses instead of His presence. And so Allah in His mercy removed the noise one by one, so that all you had left was the silence that echoed your own name back to you. And in that silence, you looked up again, not to the people, not to the past, but to the one who was always there, watching, waiting, loving you in ways no human ever could. You weren't abandoned. You were rerouted. You weren't overlooked. You were redirected. You weren't forgotten. You were chosen to finally walk a path that had no one else's fingerprints but Allah's. Because the truth is, the moment you felt the most alone was actually the moment you were the most held. Allah never left. He never withdrew His mercy. He just pulled you out of the crowd so He could rebuild your identity without interference. So that the next time you're loved, you'll know it's not because of how much you gave, but because of how much He healed. The next time someone stays, it won't be because you chased them. It'll be because your soul now magnetizes those who recognize what Allah protected in you. This loneliness wasn't meant to punish you. It was meant to awaken you, to show you what it feels like to be carried only by Allah, to show you the difference between being remembered by people and being never forgotten by your Creator. So maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the chapter where your story becomes sacred, where you stop depending on being seen and start walking like someone who was already written in the divine plan all along, because you were never alone. You were being called back by the one who never leaves. And sometimes, to hear His voice clearly, He has to let every other one go silent first. You felt forgotten, but that feeling was the beginning of your return. So maybe this pain wasn't your ending. Maybe it was the moment Allah pulled you out of what was quietly destroying you, so He could finally place you where your soul can breathe again. You are not forgotten. You are not behind. And you are not being punished. You're just being redirected with love, with wisdom, and with a future far better than anything you're grieving right now. Don't give up. Don't lose hope. And don't ever think that Allah isn't with you. Because the same Allah who allowed the pain is the one rewriting your story with something you'll be grateful for one day, inshallah.